Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our 23rd annual client luncheon. We're happy to have everybody join. This is new, it's by Zoom, and we're all trying something new because obviously the coronavirus is there and it's kind of changed the way we do things in our daily lives. So I want to thank you for joining us as we get things rolling, and I want to kind of give you a quick overview, a little bit of housekeeping and things like that as we go through with, again, this is our first Zoom event. So good morning and thank you for watching. Hope you're able to connect well. There are people at the office, so if you have questions or anything like that, you can give them a call, which is 949-660-8777. Now I'll kind of walk through our agenda for the day. First, we're going to have Laila come and talk a little bit about the Secure Act and the CARES Act. And then we're going to have Rick Dearborn come and talk about the election. And then I'm going to talk about kind of what happens next. And then we'll have closing and a survey. What's really, really important also is I get to introduce my wife and partner. It's a great pleasure for me to do that. Laila Pence is the #1 investment advisor, according to Ford. She's the #1 investment advisor in Southern California for the last 2 years in a row. Not only that, according to Forbes, she's the #6 advisor, women advisor in the entire country. But most importantly, according to Barron's magazine, which kind of ranks all advisors, and there's hundreds of thousands of advisors in the country, Laila has been on the Barron's Hall of Fame for the last decade. So Barron's Hall of Fame, that means you've got to be a Barron's ranked advisor every year for the last 10 years. There are only 145 advisors in the nation with that rare distinction. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to my wife and partner, Laila Pence.
Well, thank you so much, Dryden, for this wonderful introduction. You know, I always say I married well. You know, I am so proud of our team. Not only are they highly educated and experienced, but they have a servant's heart. You know, when this lockdown hit, we divided our team into two, those who work from home and those who work from the office. So we put together this short video to show you what they did.
One of the things we were able to do is really just kind of explain the process, what we're doing. They were hearing a lot of news. They were just hearing a lot of scary talk on the radio, the TV, their friends. And really, we just reassure them what our Pence process is.
The best thing I think that we did was start calling our clients. We started with the oldest first, and just to check in, see how they're doing, make sure they're okay. And it was really nice to connect with the clients on a non-business level. There was no reason for the call other than to say, how you doing?
I had a lot of clients that had illnesses or were unable to get out of their home or didn't have anybody around to take care of things. So I think that was one of the benefits, is getting to spend more time individually with clients and getting to visit with them personally.
I was one of the ones who got to work from the office, and to cheer up my coworkers, I would get dressed up in costumes. I even got to dress up for my clients as well when I went to go see them.
I did have the opportunity to go out and meet with clients at their homes for time-sensitive documents that either needed to be notarized or signed, as well as I had the pleasure of being able to go to the grocery store for a client because they weren't able to get out of their home during this pandemic.
I had all 3 of my kids were at home. And since we were locked together, a lot of good family time, a lot of jigsaw puzzles, a lot of movies together. And the other one was actually spending more time with my clients. Even though I couldn't physically see them, I could talk to them on the phone. Spend a lot more time with them, finding out about their day-to-day activities. They were locked in, and a lot of them couldn't even visit with their kids. And so they really appreciated just somebody from the outside calling in and caring about them and what they're up to. So.
Well, I came to the office every day, and I answered the phones, and I would speak to the clients as they called in. And of course, after over 7 years, a lot of them know me by name, and they asked how I was doing and how people in the office were doing.
So I actually created some Zoom guides. It was like a technology guide on how to download, how to install and get it working for a lot of people, just because they had a lot of questions. This was new. It's new territory for all of us.
It was really special to be able to have deep dive conversations with my clients about their own individual experiences and what they were going through, that the conversations were unique and special, and things that I had never talked about with them came up.
Stay at home. I was employee and worked full-time at home and took care of the clients. I also had the advantage to spend a little more time with my family and my son.
There were several clients who were okay with us coming to their houses, and so we did several client visits that way, as well as we were constantly trying to be in contact with individuals who maybe don't have immediate family who are able to check up on them.
You know, this coronavirus has definitely been a serious time for me and my family. We lost my grandfather due to cancer, and it's definitely been difficult. We had to postpone the funeral. You know, he didn't get his 21 flag salute as a military vet who worked in the Korean War, and so that's something that we're looking forward to once all of this is over.
Now you know what I mean when I say they have a servant's heart. The point of all this is that we're here for you when you need us most. All right, now let me talk to you about two new acts that were passed since our last luncheon. First is the Secure Act, setting every community up for retirement enhancement. This is going to affect everyone with a retirement plan. Now, let me just give you a little background first. First of all, it was just passed last December 20th of last year. It became effective already this year. And it's the first bipartisan bill to pass since 2006. Now, there's a lot of good things in this bill. I'm just going to cover 4 good ones that pertain to most of you watching today. And of course, there's one bad thing. Let's start with the good. First of all, it's changed the age to start required minimum distributions from 70.5 to 72. The government basically realized that people are living a lot longer and they needed the retirement assets to last longer. So now they give your assets an extra 1.5 years to grow. And of course, that delays you having to pay taxes for another 1.5 years. That is a big benefit. Number 2, taxpayers with earned income can now make contributions to a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA after the age of 70. The government finally figured out there's a lot of people still working past age 70. Sometimes they're working because they have to, sometimes they're working because they want to. So if you have self-employment income, salary, or part-time job, you can now contribute $7,000 for you, $7,000 for your non-working spouse, for a total of $14,000. That can go into a Roth IRA, a regular IRA, or a non-deductible IRA. Basically, there's no more age limits on IRA contributions. You can contribute anytime as long as you're still working past age 70. Number 3, for the first time, the government is allowing tax-free distributions from 529 plans to repay student loans. There is a lifetime maximum of $10,000 per beneficiary. It's not a huge amount, but everything helps. Number 4, this is a big one. Because in the past, if you are self-employed or you have a business, you can only set up a retirement plan for that business at the end of the calendar year. Now, that has changed completely. You can now set up a plan after the calendar year. Really, you can set up a plan all the way until the time you have to file your tax return or any extensions. So for example, if you're a real estate broker or you're a contractor or you're self-employed and you're sitting here now trying to do your taxes for last year and you realize you've made a lot of money and you don't have a retirement plan, you can now adopt a plan, a 401k, a profit sharing plan, a defined benefit plan. For last year, you can start it now and make the maximum contribution and really reduce your taxes. You do have until July 15th or the day you file your extension this year to adopt this plan. If any of you are interested in that, you know we're going to have a survey at the end of the session. Just mark that on your survey and we'll be glad to help. It's very time sensitive. Okay, with all those good things of the Secure Act, the government had to find a way to pay back, to get some of those tax dollars back that they gave up. And unfortunately, they're going to get it from your beneficiaries. Because the old rule was any non-spouse beneficiary, they were able to receive retirement accounts over the life expectancy. That's what they would call the stretch RMD. So for example, if you had your spouse as your primary and you named a child or someone who was age 30, well, they almost had 50 years to take the money out. That's where the stretch, 50 years to get their dollars out and also 50 years to pay the taxes. But that has completely changed. Now, for non-spouse beneficiaries, they must receive the proceeds from an inherited IRA within 10 years. That means the government is going to take their taxes back a lot faster. And that's how they're paying for a lot of those changes, a lot of those good benefits. They basically designed this law to provide more options to people who are retiring now, and they're going to take their tax dollars from the beneficiaries. So what are some of the things that we can do maybe to help them out? Okay, there's basically two things you should consider. First one is you could increase the number of beneficiaries to spread out the taxable income. So for example, let's say you normally named your 2 kids as beneficiary, and you have 2 kids and you have 4 grandchildren. So instead of just naming 2 children as your beneficiary, you could name all of them as contingent beneficiary. So that spreads the taxes instead of on 2 people over 6 people. So it spreads the tax, because the one thing you have to also know with this new law, there's no more required minimum distributions for your beneficiaries. They can wait all the way for the 10 years and take it all out once. They can take it all out the first year. They can take it over the 10 years. So if they waited the whole 10 years and took the money out, that would be a big tax bill. So that maybe you should consider having more beneficiaries instead of just your kids in this case. Another solution is to consider Roth conversion. First of all, when you do a Roth conversion, what you do is you take all of your IRAs or a portion of your IRA, pay the tax now on that money, and then roll it over into a Roth IRA. It gets converted into a Roth IRA. Once that money's into a Roth, it grows tax-free for your lifetime, for your spouse's lifetime, and for 10 years for your beneficiary. That is a huge benefit, to have all that money grow tax-free over all those lives. So, but there's a lot of tax planning that needs to be done before you do that, because you may not want to convert so much that might put you into a higher tax bracket. So if you want to do this, you definitely want to check that off on the survey at the end, and we'll be glad to help. The second major piece of legislation you need to know about is the CARES Act. That stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And that was just signed into law on March 27, 2020. It added trillions of stimulus dollars to the economy, trillions. The bill is actually 800 pages, and I read all of them. I really do believe that this is a major reason why the stock market has recovered so well this year. I'm just going to go ahead and cover 3 main points today that I feel have the best or the biggest effect on most of you watching today. First, required minimum distributions are waived for all retirement plans, including IRAs, inherited IRAs, profit-sharing plans, 401k. The only exception, unfortunately, is defined benefit. This is a big change. So if you choose not to take your required minimum this year, you'll have definitely reduce your income dramatically, and you allow your account to grow on a tax-deferred basis for 1 more year. This is only the second time in history the government has allowed this. The last time was actually 2009. Why pay taxes on money you don't need right now? Number 2, the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP as it's widely known. This program is really designed for businesses. It's a loan that businesses and self-employed people were able to take to kind of get them across this pandemic. So you got this loan, and when this PPP loan first started, it was only allowed for you to spend 75% towards salary and 25% toward other expenses, and it was only for 8 weeks. But there was a recent change in that law, which now allows it to be used for 24 weeks and 60% to salary and 40% to operating costs. So that really means that most businesses have taken this loan it will no longer be a loan because they have a longer period of time to spend it. So it'll probably be a grant and it'll be forgiven. That is going to help the economy quite a bit. It's going to help these businesses really get through this pandemic in much better financial position. Number 3, the unemployment benefits now include $600 a week. That's a huge benefit. That's the equivalent of working 40 hours a week at $15 an hour. As a matter of fact, we're finding that many people are making more money on unemployment than they're working. And some of these businesses are having a hard time getting people back to work. We do believe there will be a CARE Act 2.0 coming up, and there'll be some changes in that to help this situation. Stay tuned for that. So, and actually Rick Dearborn and Dryden will talk more about this a little bit later. All right, but with these 2 big policy moves, I kind of put together a 10 action items that maybe some of you should consider now. Let's start with that. Number 1, and this is truly hot off the press. It just happened last Tuesday. The IRS finally came with a much needed fix. It now allows anyone who's taken the required minimum distribution anytime this year, beginning January 1st all the way to August 31st. Anyone who've taken the required minimum distribution this year can now basically reverse that. They can call and say, I want to put this money back into my IRA and I don't want it to be taxed. Let me tell you, when this bill first passed, the CARES Act, we had so many calls from clients saying, wait a second, I took mine in January, why can't I give it back? Because before this fix I just did this last Tuesday, if you had taken your required minimum after February 15th, before February 15th, you weren't able to reverse it. Now you can. This is really a much needed fix that the government needed to do, and I'm so happy that they did that. So any of you who are in that position, certainly give us a call, we'll be glad to help. Now, if you haven't done so already, and you need to tell us if you want your RMD stopped this year, or maybe just reduced, let us know. Number 3, Roth conversion, Roth conversion, Roth conversion. You have heard me talk about this every single time on my podcast, because more than ever this year, this makes a lot of sense, especially with the Secure Act changes. You know, your beneficiaries are only going to have 10 years to pay the tax. And with the fact that you don't have to take your required minimum distribution this year, your tax liability is going to be less. This is really an opportune year for you to consider Roth conversion. Number 4, take more capital gains this year. Again, if you're not going to take your RMD, you're probably going to be in a lower tax bracket. But also, as you all know, there's a possibility that capital gains taxes will go up in the future. Number 5, make the maximum contributions to your 401k or your 403b. The limits have gone up this year. They are now $19,500 for people age 50 and under, and for ones who are age 50 and over, it's gone up to $25,000. Number 6, if your employer offers a Roth 401k option, most of the time, it is better to choose the Roth 401k over the traditional. Now, you do give up some tax deductions today, but the tax-free growth over your lifetime does make up for it. Number 7, if you're a business owner or self-employed, consider setting up a retirement plan for 2019. You have until July 15th, which is the deadline for filing taxes this year, or the date where you file your extension. Number 8, with the passage of the Secure Act, you really, really, really need to review your beneficiary designations. Number 9, if you're planning to make a retirement contributions, why wait till next year? Why wait till the end of the year? You might as well do it now. Get those dollars working faster. Number 10 really goes along with number 9. More than ever, with the current market volatility, consider adding to your investment account now. We do believe there's going to be a lot of opportunity coming up, and I know Dryden is going to talk quite a bit about that a little bit later. So consider doing it now. Okay, so we are joined today by Rick Dearborn, a true Washington insider who has served 6 U.S. senators and is a former White House Deputy Chief of Staff. He will share with us his insights on the upcoming election and what they mean for policy going forward. Rick joins us today from Washington, D.C.
Laila, thank you for that really thoughtful introduction. It's great to be with you, Dryden, the Pence Wealth Management team and clients for this presentation today. I'm really excited to be with you. Today, I'd like to talk about the 2020 outlook, legislative outlook, the election, the issues that are driving the election. We'll talk about the House, the Senate, what the big issues are that they face as they're working with the president. We'll talk about Vice President Biden and what's happening in the campaign. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. I'd like to start by talking about the House of Representatives. This discussion will probably be the briefest of what we talk about today, because by all accounts, as you can see on the chart that I put in front of you, the House is split 233 Democrats to 197 Republicans. The Democrats have an 18-seat advantage. There isn't anyone that I've talked to, or most folks that prognosticate in this town or around the country, that think that the Democrats would lose control of the House of Representatives. You'd need 20 to 25 competitive seats, knowing that some wouldn't go your way, in order to be able to take the House of Representatives with a 218 vote working majority. There are about 16 seats that are currently held by Democrats that are considered Trump seats. They're considered Trump seats because Trump won them in 2016. Democrats won the bulk of all those back in 2018. So they are seats that the president did well in those particular states and districts, in California, here in California, in Iowa, in Texas, where there's also some open seats, but also seats like Oklahoma City and Charleston. And then about 6 Republican seats that are always competitive and always in play every 2 years, as the House of Representatives is up for election every 2 years. But by all accounts, it looks as if Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats will wind up keeping their strong majority. The only thing that would really threaten that would be a wave of support that would follow President Trump. Conditions would have to be right. And we'll get into a lot of these issues within the presentation today, but the coronavirus would have to have subsided. The cases of hospitalization would have to go down. The economy would have to be really overperforming. We'd have to have fantastic job reports for the Republicans to be able to take the House. What's really in play is the Senate. So let's talk a little bit about who is in jeopardy in the Senate and what the different states are that we need to keep our eye on. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this chart. It's full of names. Every one of the people on this list is a United States senator. The folks in red, it illustrates the state that they're from and then their name next to it, or if it's an open seat with challengers where the name isn't set yet because Republicans and Democrats are still deciding through primary who would wind up vying for that seat. But the easiest thing to do is just kind of walk through and let you know that if you look at this chart, the middle column shows you which seats lean Republican, either Alabama, Senator Doug Jones, who's a Democrat, Georgia, Senator Loeffler, who's Republican, Purdue of Georgia, Senator Purdue, who's Republican. There's an open seat in Kansas. Senator Pat Roberts is retiring. Senator Joni Ernst is a Republican in Iowa. And Senator Tom Tillis is Republican in North Carolina. And then below the line, and even including Senator Tillis, you see a lot of seats in gray. Those are true toss-up seats. They could go either way between Republican or Democrat. So the easiest thing for us to do when we focus on this chart is to just know at the very top of the chart, Alabama is a very heavily Republican state. It has been in the last several elections. Doug Jones is currently down by about 12 points, according to what we're looking at, against any person that would run against him that comes out of the Republican primary. There's a current runoff in Alabama. Every other number that you see that runs down that right side column shows a little bit of an advantage for the Republican senators that I mentioned, but predominantly a Democrat advantage for their challengers, all the way down, starting with Loeffler, all the way down to Michigan, which is Gary Peters. He's a sitting Democratic senator, but he has a stiff challenge from John Jones in Michigan, a naval retiree, a strong candidate who I think is has a decent shot at taking the seat in Michigan. If you look at the states on the next slide, it's easier to look at this as we step back across the country. The solid red states basically show the seats that will probably stay in Republicans' hands. They're considered very safe. The pink states are the ones in play, like Montana with Senator Daines. That's a great state to talk about real quick because you've got Governor Bullock, Democrat governor who ran for president, decided to step out of the presidential race, was encouraged to run for Senate and is currently running against Senator Daines and is actually up by several points in the polls right now. The same situation is playing out in Iowa, where Joni Ernst, Republican senator, was well ahead and is now neck to neck. The same is playing out in Georgia, where you have Senator Perdue, who was well ahead, and then and he's a Republican, and John Ossoff, the Democrat, won his primary. And John Ossoff, the Democrat in Georgia, against Senator Perdue, the sitting Republican, Mr. Ossoff is up by a couple of points. So what this map shows you is that there's a large number that are in the middle of the graph, especially the brown seats, like Colorado, which is a toss-up, Arizona is a toss-up, North Carolina is a toss-up, Maine is a toss-up. Some would say that Georgia and Iowa and Montana should be considered toss-ups based on the prior graph. But this is a very close Senate. It's 53-47 Republican to Democrat, and it's a 50-50 bet in Vegas right now whether or not the Senate is going to stay Republican or if it will flip and go Democrat in the November elections. So all of these races, whether it's the president or it's Senate races or House races, are all predicated upon polls. That's the only way we can really judge how somebody is doing. So we're seeing a lot of polls right now. If you look at the polling today, on Saturday, what you're going to figure out is you're looking at the polls from Friday, from yesterday, and today, you're going to see that Vice President Biden is up by a considerable margin. Some of the recent polling that came out this week had him up anywhere from 10 to 12 points. This graph that you're looking at now, the simplest way to describe it is the orange line represents the volatility in how many points off the polling was in given elections in 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, and then the presidential election where Donald Trump won in 2016. That's wildly off. Anytime you get above the margin of error, which is usually 2 to 3 points, these polls have been off from 4.6 points in 2000 all the way to 5.1 points in 2016. And all that tells you is that these pollsters, as good as they are never completely accurate. There's going to be some give and take in the polls, and we're going to see that throughout. One thing I would tell you is that in the election of 2016, there were 150 polls that were conducted between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump between Labor Day and Election Day. Of all 150 polls, Hillary Clinton was ahead in every single one of those except for 7 of those polls that showed Donald Trump winning. So take these polls with a grain of salt. This is my favorite chart. I can simplify it for you. What it shows you in the left column, and then we'll get to the middle and the right column, is in the left column, based on what I just said about the number of polls that were out there, Hillary Clinton was doing great in all of these battleground states that run from Missouri all the way down to Nevada, except for a couple of states that you can see are red. But in the national poll, she was ahead by 3 points. In many polls, she was ahead by more than that. But in the popular vote, which is the middle column, when the election came, you can see that Donald Trump was wildly ahead in states like Missouri, where he was ahead by 19 points, and even in Georgia, where he was ahead by 6 points, which had predictions that swung wildly the other way. And the amount that Hillary Clinton won certain states was much less, based on the polling that had been done and then the election results. All of this means in the final column, what was the difference between the polls that were out there and then the percentage that the president won in each of those states, from Missouri down to Nevada. And you can see that that is a wild swing from 10 points in Missouri all the way down to a couple of points of victory that he won in Georgia, Florida, Arizona, et cetera. So just understand, as you're thinking through this presentation today and you're thinking about the election ahead, take these polls with a grain of salt. It's going to be the conditions on the ground, the issues facing the candidate, that are really going to be the deciders. Let's talk about the battleground states. Let's talk about this matchup between Vice President Biden and Donald Trump. As I mentioned prior, Vice President Biden is in a strong position currently here on Saturday. He's ahead by anywhere from 10 to 16 points in the different polls that we've seen. And in these particular states, this is a snapshot that was done this week that shows he's up anywhere from 7 points in battleground states like Michigan to 5 and 3 and 4 points in Wisconsin, Florida, and New Hampshire. Donald Trump is only up by a small margin in North Carolina, in Texas, and in Ohio. He has a 7-point advantage in Georgia. This is the snapshot today, and remember, that's today. A lot's going to change between now and November. So let's back up, look out, and take a look at the map. What does this mean? Well, look at this as the electoral map. This is Larry Sabato's map. It's the one that's most commonly used. He updates it on a regular basis. This has been updated recently. It's as fresh as I can get it for you today. What you'll see is the brick red states show the electoral map for Donald Trump, and that the brick red states are the ones that he should safely be able to win in November. The dark blue states are the states that Vice President Biden should easily win in November. A huge difference I'd like to talk about is that it takes a lot of those brick red states to make up for the amount of electoral votes in some of those dark blue states, like your own state of California and in New York, et cetera. Then you've got some toss-up states like Arizona in yellow, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. And then you have lighter support for the Democrat, light blue, in states like Michigan, Nevada, and Minnesota, and a lighter red in Texas, Iowa, Ohio, and Georgia. When we get to the end of the presentation, I'll talk a lot about the conditions that might be set for the election and how I would predict the electoral vote to go, but I'm going to save that to the end. What are the biggest issues that we're facing in this election? There's none bigger than this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. As you look at this chart, this is a chart that talks about the approval and disapproval of the president in terms of his handling of the pandemic since the beginning of the pandemic in March all the way through to this weekend. What you'll find is that when folks began starting to file for unemployment and the beginning of the press conferences happened that the president joined himself, his approval rating was relatively high before the unemployment numbers came in and as he was providing good information about how we were trying to tackle the problem. Instead of passing that information feed and daily update off to the vice president through the task force, he continued to provide the information, and the public also saw that the number of cases started to rise and the number of deaths started to rise. And even though the administration was doing what they could to address this issue, his numbers in terms of his approval of handling the virus, whether it be his language or actions, there's lots of debate about what all the impact may have been, but his current approve, disapprove is upside down. So he's at 55% disapprove of how he's handling coronavirus and 41% approval. Just to put it in perspective, Congress has basically the same track record of approve and disapprove. So it's a drag on the president for the election as an issue, as well as Congress. Let's talk a little bit about what we have left to do for the CARES Act. The CARES Act is the legislative bill that is funded to help us focus on how best to solve for the COVID-19 pandemic. 3 bills were passed, a total of $3 trillion. CARES addresses multiple issues. Laila earlier talked a lot about unemployment. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about one of the provisions that's in the bill that's going to come up. This is the piece of legislation that will wind up taking up sometime after the July 4th recess. It's called CARES 2. It builds on the earlier CARES bills. It's just an acronym that is the Coronavirus Authorization Act for Recovery. So CARES 2 will probably wind up coming to the Senate floor and House floor towards the end of July. The House has already passed its HEROES bill, but they may have to vote on a Senate package that comes over. It's the Senate's time to act, and they likely won't even start working on this until the end of July. There are 4 large buckets that they'll have to solve for in terms of addressing the coronavirus, its impact on our economy and the health of our citizens in this piece of legislation. The Paycheck Protection Program, I think everybody's familiar with that. It helps small businesses. It pays them to retain their employees and to help pay their bills during this crisis and during this period of time. It's a loan. Everybody knows that we're talking about turning it into more of a loan forgiveness program, which makes it more of a grant from the government to these small businesses. But it is the one program that's keeping fewer people off of the unemployment rolls than otherwise would be without the program in place. The unemployment insurance fix, again, Laila talked about this. Currently, if you receive unemployment, you get an additional $600 per month that was passed in the earlier provisions of these CARES bills. This particular provision is now up for debate. The Democratic Party would like to continue to extend the $600. The Republican Party would like to lower that amount, and their rationale is tied to individuals who receive unemployment with the additional $600 and what that might mean in terms of employers' ability to hire them back at a wage rate that either can match that or is higher, creating an incentive for those employees to come back, who still have anxieties and fears about their health conditions and those conditions in the work environment. That'll be a big debate as part of this bill. State and local funding, every state and every locality is facing a funding shortage due to the loss of tax revenue. So there will be funding for states. I think that you're going to see not the large dollar amount of the $900 billion that was in the House passed package called the HEROES Act, and maybe not even the $500 billion that Republican Senator Bill Cassidy and Democratic Senator Bob Menendez have laid out as a bipartisan solution. I think the Trump administration, with many more of the Republicans in the Senate who also have the majority in the Senate, are going to look at a lower number. I will say, as the number of jobs increase, as the economy grows stronger, if that is the case, and as the number of hospital cases starts to roll down, I still think that number for state and local could even be smaller as we get into this July debate. Healthcare is the last bucket. Is for the frontline responders. It's for all the folks that are helping us, the nurses, the doctors, the hospitals. Those buckets still have good money in them, but we may have to refill it. And that's the big CARES Act that we'll face before the August legislative break and at the end of July. So what are the things that we still have to focus on as a Congress that are going to be really critical as issues to solve for, and will probably wind up tying into some of the issues that both Republicans and Democrats, Vice President Biden and the president, will wind up wrestling with between now and the election? There are 3 must-pass items. We've talked about the CARES Act. I won't go into greater detail on that. We walked through it. That's going to come up at the end of July and right before the August break. August, the entire month, is a month that both the House and the Senate normally recess for. I see no reason why they won't do that unless they don't get their work done on the CARES Act, or if issues like police reform and criminal justice reform that were just in front of the Senate a couple of days ago continue to be something that they feel like they have to resolve. But the CARES Act will come up, probably the last vote the Senate will take and that the House will act on before they go into the August break. NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the big defense bill, our military spending. That's going to be coming to the Senate floor. The House has yet to mark up that bill. They'll work on it in July as well. Both houses, the House and the Senate, are trying to finish the Armed Services bill before the August recess. That's a big bill that's passed every year. And then funding. The government runs out of money on September 30th, but the government never runs out of money. They print the money, and they wind up passing things called a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution means we can't get our work done on our 12 appropriations bills, so we're going to punt on being able to fund the government. We'll just fund it at this level, the level we've been funding it at, for some period of time. Everybody believes that there will be a continuing resolution that runs through the end of the election, after the election. If a President Trump wins, they will turn to the appropriations bills and work on those before the end of the calendar year. If Vice President Biden wins the election, they'll likely push those spending bills into next year, into January, February, to give the Vice President, in his capacity as the new president, time to work through the spending priorities that he has to put before the Congress. There's several items that might pass an infrastructure bill, but everybody talks about the need to pay for it. Its chances of passage are from a percentage standpoint, probably 40%, 30 to 40%, much lower. The police reform I referenced, it's before the Senate right now. The House has a proposal as well. And so we'll see if that comes back as an issue, and we'll see if they wind up resolving it as we move forward. There's technical corrections to a tax bill that occur every year. These would be corrections to the prior passed Trump tax proposal that may happen in September, tied to the continuing resolution, but it may also be punted until the end of the year and after the general election, which is very likely. I want you to look at this chart. If you leave the presentation today, these are three numbers I really want you to take home with you and remember. The biggest, the jobs report. The June jobs report that was reflective of May employment numbers were 2.5 million new jobs created, and that came out in the first part of June. In 5 days, July 2nd, 5 days from today, we're going to have the next jobs report. If we see similar numbers in the millions, and then it builds in August, and it builds in September and into October, those economic conditions will really be drivers both for the presidential race and for the Senate and the House races. If you're the party in power when the economy is doing well, you wind up benefiting from the economy doing well. We have these social issues that we're wrestling with in our country right now, and we have a pandemic that has yet to reside. So how these all break out as we get closer to the election is really important. We have 32 days left. There are 32 legislative days left in July and September and maybe the first part of October before your House and your Senate both adjourn, and all House members and the senators who are up for election go out and finish their campaigning for the November election. Speaking of the election, we have 129 days from today, from Saturday today, before the election. That's not a lot of time, folks. It's creeping up on us. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. We talked about this a couple of minutes ago. What does it mean? This chart, I think, is pretty simple to understand, so don't let all the lines confuse you. Look at the purple line that goes across. Above that line, 5 points, 10 points, 15 points. That's how many points that particular president of either party won their election. Below the line is how many points that particular president lost their election by in terms of points. Along the bottom is the bottom axis represents real gross domestic product growth for the last 2 years of a president's first term. So every president's last 2 years, the GDP for them for the last 2 years averaged was an economic impact that, according to the graph that you see in front of you and the data that we've received, prove the point that as the economy does well, so do the chances for re-election regardless of your party. So if you're Reagan or Clinton or Obama or George W. Bush, you wound up doing well if the GDP was doing well. Obama's interesting. I think Obama was turning a recession around in 2008, had a strong couple of years, was from a popularity standpoint, riding pretty high in that election. So a little bit of an anomaly in this chart. But as you can tell, George H.W. Bush in 92, who lost to Clinton, Ford in 76, and Carter in 1980, they wound up suffering because of low GNP. So that gives you some sense of how important the economy is to these elections, these presidential elections. This chart seems obvious, so I'm going to make the nuance for you. This shows a potential Trump electoral wave, as well as a potential Vice President Biden electoral wave, and what would happen to the different houses of Congress. So let's look at Trump. Let's say Trump wins and status quo. The House stays Democrat, the Senate stays Republican. He'll be able to build on the pieces of legislation he'll pass. He'll put a lot of pressure on the House. He will have thought he's won by a mandate. The Senate will have thought they dodged a bullet. And he'll be able to get large pieces of legislation like his infrastructure bill and probably a second tax package through in the next congressional session. If he loses the Senate, and we've talked earlier about it's unlikely he'll lose the House, then what is nuanced about this chart is that Chuck Schumer, unlike Senator McConnell, is certain to eliminate the filibuster, set conditions for a simple majority of 51 senators to be able to pass legislation, and he and a Speaker Pelosi would wind up leveraging their newfound power against a Trump in terms of legislation that the president could pass and force him to have to accommodate much more so than he would if the Senate stayed in Republican hands. In a Biden landslide, the vice president would be able to push his entire agenda. We'll talk about that in the next slide, what he has listed out as some of the things that he'd like to focus on. If the Senate remains in Republican hands, it'll be the only backstop that Republicans would have, because you'd have a Speaker Pelosi and a Democratic president, but it would put a lot of pressure on those Republicans to keep from passing a lot of the legislation that both Speaker Pelosi and President Biden would want to pass. So let's talk a little bit about the Biden agenda. This is in no way exhaustive list, but it gives you some ideas of some of the commitments that Joe Biden has set out as his agenda. Now, granted, this is the agenda that he set out. Just because you set an agenda out doesn't mean that these things necessarily pass. But these are very different philosophically from President Trump's agenda that he'd been working on for the last 3.5 years. By all accounts, I would focus on the energy piece. Our economy's economic growth, one of the biggest drivers has been the energy side of our economy. The fact that we've had low prices on energy, that's been a big driver for the economy. One of the issues that both progressive candidates and the vice president have now talked about is focused on passing items like the Green New Deal. That's sure to be an issue that would come up in a Biden presidency and then have to be debated in Congress by both Republicans and Democrats with no certainty in terms of how that would play out. Same with his labor agenda, potential for $15 federal minimum wage, paid family leave, healthcare, Medicare for all. He's not subscribed to that. There's a lot of pressure from progressives for him to do so. He's not ascribed to that, but there could be pressures, especially if both the House and the Senate go Democrat. There could be greater pressure on the new president. Taxes, you could see increases in taxes, but again, there could be the backstop of the Senate Republicans, and we just have to see how that plays out. Also on education, he's talked about community college education for individuals and retiring student debt. So these are just some of the items that you could see that a President Biden, along with a Congress, would have to wrestle with in a new Congress. So here's the big reveal. Let's talk about the election prediction. So I got to go bold, folks. I want to go bold and say that in this particular graph, and you'll see it suggests that there is a large electoral vote for Donald Trump at 302 versus 214. But, and this is a big, big but, this is all dependent on the economy, those numbers we talked about every month. If jobs are coming back, if we put 2.5 million jobs in June, we're seeing something similar in July and in August and in September and October. The coronavirus, the curve would have to be flattened, hospitalizations would have to be down, new cases would have to be down. It really would have to turn on becoming a question of the economy, which has been the strength of the president. And that is the issue that would wind up propelling him to a potential victory. So I'm going against the grain because, to be honest with you, the vice president currently ahead by 12 and 14 points. If coronavirus is still an issue, if the fall flu and flu season hits early prior to the election, and if the economy is sputtering, then Vice President Biden is going to see a lot more blue states on this map. But what I will say and point out on here is I think that the conditions are such that if the economy is strong, these battleground states like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Pennsylvania could flow to the president if the economy is strong. You still have toss-ups like Michigan and Nevada. I went bold on Arizona with my prediction. Again, this is me flipping a coin, trying to figure out how it plays out, but I'd rather make a bold prediction to give you something to think about. It's really been my pleasure to be with you today. I hope I've been able to leave you with a couple of things to think about, whether it's the issues that face our country, the candidates themselves, what's going to happen in the House and the Senate. You're in great hands with Dryden and Laila Pence and the Pence Wealth Management team. I enjoyed being with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rick, for that insightful and informative presentation. Hi, I'm Doug Frazier, a 12-year veteran of the firm and a Pence Wealth Management advisor. I'm honored to introduce you today to our Chief Investment Officer, Dryden Pence. Dryden obtained his degree in economics from Harvard University in 1982, and in that same year, he was commissioned in the U.S. Army as a military intelligence officer through the ROTC program at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dryden is a retired colonel and the recipient of the Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal with a V for Valor in Combat, and the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Legion of Merit from the U.S. Army. Dryden Pence combines his formal training and knowledge as an economist with his years of experience in psychological warfare to bring a unique understanding of human behavior and how it affects the economy and the markets. Dryden is a frequent speaker on multiple news networks such as CNBC and Fox. Without any further ado, I bring you Dryden Pence.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And we're real happy to have Doug with the firm. He's been with us for over 12 years. And those of you who got to know him know he's a great advisor and everything. The other thing that's important here is, as you know, again, we're doing this Zoom event, and Rick and Laila have given you some great insight. And I do have a quick apology. I know, and actually I've gotten a few texts from people while this is going on. You guys are a little disappointed that you're not getting the food. We did call it a luncheon after all, and normally the food is exceedingly good. So for those of you that are a little bit depressed about not having the rubber chicken, you now have your rubber chicken joining you for lunch. And next year, which will be May the 1st, we'll make sure that we have either chicken or salmon or something. So here you go. If you were missing the chicken, there it is. All right. Now, moving right along. This is an important disclosure. You're familiar with this. You've seen it before. You have to repeat. If I'm going to talk to you about anything of substance, that means we sort of have to talk about performance. And if that's the case, you have to repeat after me. Now, everybody's on their honor because I can't hear you, but try this, right? You have to repeat after me. Past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Okay, now everybody's yelling at your screen right now. But the important thing to know is that we're going to walk through a lot of things here about what's going on with the lockdown and with COVID and the economy and politics and how all this is going to shape for us for the rest of the year and the rest of the decade, as a matter of fact. But before we get into that, I'm very, very proud of our team. We've got a great group of people that work really, really hard for you every day. And I'm very proud of them. And during this moment, when we're halfway through the year, but there were some moments there over the last couple of months that have been pretty intense. And what I wanted to do was kind of show you a little bit about what the team did so that you can kind of get a sense. I call this video, the Battle of the Lockdown. Watch this.
In the beginning of the year, we were already positioned to be a little risk off, considering we were watching the elections come later that year. Nobody predicted the virus. Kudos to Ian. He started tracking the virus in China, and he was spot on. This all happened late January, about January 21st, where he started showing the data to Dryden. It was kind of amazing to see how this was all playing out in that country. We did tons of research to figure out exactly what was going on. By March 13th, Dryden went on CNN and he spelled it out.
Let's get some context. Dryden Pence is the Chief Investment Officer for Pence Wealth Management and joins us now. Fantastic to have you on the show, sir. Your perspective, is this an understandable reaction, the pullback, the speed, or are we at the stage where we can call this an overreaction?
Well, I think it's an overreaction because you have an issue of fear in here and a little hysteria worked into the market. And you're seeing these big moves in and out. So I think the market overreaction is there. And the thing we have to do is kind of combat that with a little calmness and taking a look at really what happens here, because the period of time that this is going to affect the economy itself is not that long. This is probably a 60, 90, maybe 120-day phenomenon, but it is not something that's going to wipe the economy out for an entire year. It's something people get over this in about 14 days, and then they're going to be able to go back to doing what they're doing. So this is, I think there's an overreaction to this, but we're seeing good, strong policy response, and I think that we'll begin to see that almost on a daily basis, and that's going to help recover from this.
I think a lot of the problem that's been created here is the inability to gauge in terms of numbers, in terms of cases. You said something there that I think is very interesting. You said actually we perhaps need to focus less on cases and counting and testing and talk about how quickly people get well and how many in terms of proportion get well from this.
That is exactly right. The most important number here is not how many people get sick, but rather how quickly they get well. 80% of these cases are mild, and you're over it in 14 days. It's uncomfortable, but it's not the end of the world. And then you're able to go back your life. And you've built up the antibodies in your system during that period of time. So the most important number here is how quickly people get well. And that way they can get back to their lives. We can get back to a relatively normal economic trend that we were on before this started. And that's about 14 days.
So in your view, we're talking about perhaps 2 quarters, a technical recession, but then a swift pickup? Because a lot of the debate as well, and I think, again, the fear that we're seeing in markets is that inability to, or willingness to put a time horizon on this, but also whether it's a V-shaped pickup or a U-shape, because that matters too.
I think the most important thing here is to understand time. Time for reaction for governments, time for reaction for people, time for reaction for markets. Markets tend to react more quickly, and in this case, they've overreacted, we think. But I think that we recognize you've got about 14 days as people start getting better. Because it's not uniform as how this is affecting the world, it's more of a rolling period, and that's why we're saying it's a 60 to 90-day event. Before people are beginning to get back. And government responses are going to kind of bridge people in these 2 to 4 week periods. And that's going to help take care of the economic risk that people see to the market. And now what we need to do is focus on, for the markets, taking the emotional risk out of the market and let people begin to get back to normal. Certainly there's a health risk. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Every day you're going to see bigger numbers as we do more testing, but that's kind of a result of what's already out there in the environment as it is. And so I think the thing is, people don't need to overreact to that. We know that part of it's bad, but again, people get well. We have now 100,000 data points on this illness, and those 100,000 data points say that the mortality rate is lower than some of the other viruses that we've seen, and that the recovery rate is a reasonable period of time.
For now, I think even just the reality check and a different way of thinking about what's going on was incredibly beneficial. Dryden Pence, thank you so much for joining us.
I remember one day when this was all going on, Dryden came in and he read us a poem, Kipling's poem. The title or the name of it is If. And it starts off by saying, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs,
The investment team's been through this before, back in 2008 and 2009 in the financial crisis, and again 2013 with the taper tantrum, and then we had the tech crunch in the first part of 16, and we all know about that sell-off at the end of 18. So we've seen this volatility before. And when we all got together, we decided that being in the office was very important. We set up a plan that we could work remotely, but we all decided that 7 sets of ears and eyes working together was the way we could handle this the best. So we all just rolled up our sleeves and took our ties off and got ready to battle.
After that, we started doing videos and podcasts. On March 23rd, at the bottom of the market, Dryden actually talked about the number of days from peak to trough. And we're just trying to get people through the panic. Also, Laila started doing podcasts, and she talked about the actions our clients or people can take and how they can take advantage of the sell-off.
I've been doing this for a long, long time, and there's been 4 major opportunities in the last 30 years for people to buy stocks, and we think this is one of them. Also, for those of you who have IRAs who are not living on that income, on that required minimum distribution, and you have dollars, this is a good time to also to consider Roth conversion. Okay, just doing a little bit of Roth conversion today, converting money at slow tax value and having them grow in your Roth, have all the growth of this market as you turn around being in your Roth tax-free. This is an amazing opportunity to do that.
When the headlines get going and everyone is just kind of really over exuberant and really negative or positive and everything's moving all over and the negative headlines hit day after day after day, our job really is to say, hey, some of this stuff is an overreaction and some of it is something that we should worry about. But at the end of it, if we're going to be here longer than the volatility, then it's our job to find the good stuff to buy.
I remember Dryden sent me to listen to an expert presentation on China and the global economy to get more information. I found out that we already had covered it long before they did.
We kept trying to get people to focus on the fact that the virus is the virus is the virus, and it followed a very predictable pattern, a number of days in terms of incubation or recovery. As bad as the news got, we needed people to focus on when things would reopen and the reaction of the markets and the economy to that.
The investment team's been together for a while, so in periods like this, we rely on each other and we have the trust with each other. We all know we're going to get through this. And one of the reasons it's like that is because Dryden has us run battle drills all the time on what to do when it gets like this. And we're usually running those when it's not very tense and we're able to really focus, and when it gets crazy, we just go to what we're supposed to do in that moment. So we don't miss a lot of things when it's like that. So nervous clients call in and we say it's going to be okay, let us do our job, and we've got this.
And I think that's why you can see why I'm so proud of our team. It's really important when a lot of things are happening and a lot of things are coming at you, and news and panic and fear and all of these things, that people kind of know to work together, keep things lined out and move forward with the way we have to. Now, a lot of you by now have looked at your accounts and you know that we navigated this pretty darn well. We kind of do on a pretty regular basis. A lot of you have been clients for a long time, so you know kind of what happens. When the market's going up, we tend to do better when the market's going up. When the market goes down, we tend to go down less than the market goes down. Everybody's accounts are different, but it's important that our methodology and our process moves us to a place that helps give you greater comfort about your income and confidence in your wealth. And those of you that are watching today that are not yet clients, make sure you reach out to one of our advisors and meet with them. And they'll be happy to show you our performance and show you how we've done through all of this. You'll find out that it's an experience quite different than a lot of other people. Now, you can see how the market's gone. It's been pretty darn volatile. We covered that in the CNN interview. I mean, the reason why CNN put us on that day was because they know we do fundamental research. They know we have a good view of what's going on and can give a better perspective to all the news that's going on out there. That's why we're on Bloomberg. That's why we're on Fox. That's why we're on CNN, CNBC, and all that, because we've got a pretty sharp team that does a good job. So that when you see this volatility that's on the slide that's right in front of you, recognize that this isn't something new to us. This is a battle we're used to fighting. And we're able to do the things that we need to do for you to make sure it works out in a good way. I mean, it's really just getting in every day. So there's a couple of things you've got to recognize. This volatility that we've been seeing the first part of the year, it's going to continue. Probably not the same magnitude, but we're going to continue to see some volatility throughout the rest of the year. So there's two big things to pay attention to. First one is there's going to be capital gains. You're going to need to take some capital gains. We're going to take some capital gains. To make profits, you have to take profits. It's very, very important. And the second one is you're probably going to see some higher cash balances. Now, those higher cash balances are going to be important because what that does for us is that it gives us kind of dry powder. That's an important thing to have. We'll have some higher cash balances in the accounts, and you got to measure it. That's not an indication of panic. That's an indication of pounce. We want to have the cash so that we can be ready to take most advantage of the market volatility. These things are important. You know, a lot of you have been with us for a long time. Some of you are fairly new clients, and then there's a lot of guests watching today. I'm really excited about the numbers that we're seeing of people coming in to tune into the show. But I want to talk with you for a moment about why we're different. You know, you saw in the roller earlier, we had the Pence principles and the Pence process. And, you know, as a retired Army colonel, I pretty much hold everybody pretty strictly to the standard operating procedures. Chad mentioned battle drills. We actually do that. But we had the process and the principles that have served us well for so long. And then we're not asset allocators. Now, we allocate between fixed income and equity, but we're not like everybody else who says, well, you have to have this much money in emerging markets and this much money in large cap growth and this much money in small cap value and this much money here and there. We don't do that. We don't invest in the index. We invest in companies. That's really important. You know, one thing we learned in the big housing crisis was that the idea about asset allocation failed. It was a theory that failed. Everything correlated to one, and the market went down. Everybody, you remember 2009? It was pretty uncomfortable, right? Well, we've never played that way because we believe that companies are the best expression of an investment idea. So we invest in individual companies, not the entire index. We invest in companies that serve the fundamental needs of human beings. We focus on the big noble theme. We identify the choke point. We find the people that have pricing power and excess earnings at those moments. That's our process, and it serves us well, and it continues to serve us well. You see, the other thing that we do is we have an independent perspective. We're not part of a big investment banking firm. We're not part of a big wirehouse. There's nobody saying, well, you have to invest over in this sector because we have a large investment banking relationship there, and we have to have global equity markets that we've got to deal with and blah. No, we don't. We're independent. There's really only one person we work for, and that's you, the client. And that independent perspective allows us to say, we're going to do some in-house research. I got a question for you. Do you believe everything you read on the news? Do you believe everything you see on the news? I don't. Or are you absolutely sure that everybody around you is perfectly rational? No. That's because we don't either. Right? So we don't take things at face value. That's why we do some boots on the ground research. That's why we send Ali to China. We send Ian to Houston. And back when everything was kind of nervous around here, sent Milo out, right, to watch the loading docks at Walmart to make sure while the cupboards were bare, are the trucks arriving on time? Is the supply chain going to catch up on time? He makes friends with the guys on the loading docks and know, yeah, it's all coming in just fine. We'll be all right. In 3 days, this is over. And guess what? It began to get straight again. You remember those moments when everybody was worried about the cupboard being bare. But the supply chain was okay. And we knew that because we got out of the office, got out on the ground, and did the fundamental research to find out what was really going on. That's part of the difference of the firm. And then the other thing we do is we adjust risk based on conditions, right? We'll take some chips off the table, we'll increase cash, and then we'll be prepared to reinvest in equity markets. So there'll be some movement one way or the other based on market conditions. And we find over time that that helps us get better results. Now let's talk about what's going on right now. There's this concern that, wow, the market's gone up a lot. It's recovered. It bounced off of that, but the economy still seems to be weak. There's a lot of unemployment. What's going on? Why is there this disconnect between the stock market and the economy? So let me cover that just for a second. You see, the stock market is a forward discounting mechanism. What it does is, as a forward discounting mechanism, it looks through and into the future. It looks through what's going on today and looks into the future and says, no, what's it about tomorrow? Right? We know a lot about this coronavirus. We know a couple of things about it. And one of the things is that it doesn't have that high of a mortality rate. Therefore, global aggregate demand is not going to go down that much. Therefore, eventually the economy is going to recover. This is a temporary event, and aggregate demand is going to go through it. So the market's looking through it and pricing in what the future is like. So there's this disconnect right now, right? We think the economy is still weak because not everybody's back to work yet, but the market says, yes, but we're going to get there. And that's what's pricing in. Now, here's what's other important is its consolidation, because this has not been an equal, I'll show you a chart in just a second, this has not been an equal recovery. It's variable speed recovery. So all of this, right, the economy coming back at one speed, the stock market coming back at another speed is going to create some volatility. And what's very important for us, and you've heard me say it 100 times, is take advantage of volatility, don't be its victim. And that's kind of why I said it's important for us to have cash. Take advantage of volatility, don't be its victim. Take a look at this chart. We bounced off those really ugly moments on March the 23rd, right? Those are some ugly moments. We kept our wits about us and we've bounced off of that dramatically, right? And we know that because, the average, there was a chart on there previously about the average number of days the market goes down, average number of days the market goes up. You can kind of read this like a roadmap. But now what's happened is the market's come back, it's been uneven. You see, information technology and consumer discretionary, those are the only two sectors that have really come all the way back. Those are the two sectors, and everything else is still lagging. So what should we do? Recognize the market's come back, take advantage of that, but also be prepared for those things that are going to still have a lot of room to run and take advantage of that going forward. And that's why Laila talks sometimes about people sending in some more money, because the issue is we need to have it on hand because opportunities are going to arise. You know how volatile this market gets and things happen quickly and windows open and close quickly. And quite frankly, I can't shoot bullets I don't have. So that's one reason why we kind of say, people, if you've got some money sitting on the sidelines, it's good to have it ready. It's good to have it ready because there's going to be opportunities between now and the rest of the year. So let me move on and talk about that, because we've talked about we've done reasonably well through the first half of the year, and this big catastrophic moments, we've kind of come out on the other side of it. And now what's going to happen the rest of the year? There's still some big issues out there. Big questions around, did we open too soon? What about a second wave? What about all this stimulus that Rick and Laila talked about? And what about the election? All of these things are going to cause the market to do some stuff throughout the rest of this year and then as we look for the rest of the decade. Now, I've been doing videos on the coronavirus for a while. I've been I think we've done 7 videos about the math around the virus, about what's going on. I mean, you saw Ian in the video, the virus is the virus is the virus. Humans are humans are humans. This thing exists no matter what we do. We do not have a vaccine at this point, and we do not have treatments at this point. So the virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. And it's important for us to recognize that and understand and use that information to inform how we're going to do things, right? I mean, we know what it is. About 10% of the people that get tested have the virus. Of that, about 80% of the people have a mild case. And of those mild cases, they're ready in they're fine in about 14 days. The remaining group of people have a period of about 21 days to 45 days where they have a severe case. And then there's a small percentage of people that succumb to mortality. And that's serious. I mean, everybody now knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that's been affected by this virus. So it's kind of out there and we all know it. But this is the math. This is the math. We've got lots of data points now. And there's three big things to know. At outbreak, you have the moment where you got more than 100 cases. Then you have peak virus, the moment where you've got the most number of cases and it begins to decline thereafter. Everybody remembers seeing the reports in New York and how that goes and how they hit their peak, right? You watch that daily. And then you have the crossover point. Now, the crossover point's really important. That's the moment where more people are getting well than are getting sick. Now, I've talked about that. You can go see all those other videos, but those are the key dates that we pay attention to. And when we did, remember, the video you saw when I was on CNN, that was over 90 days ago. That was over 100 days ago. But we kind of laid out everything that was going to happen, and it pretty much came to pass. But so now we've gone from having 100,000 data points to 9.8 million data points. That's a lot of information to know how this virus affects us and what's going on. And then you take a look at that and you recognize, there's the chart. We broke it down and made it simple for you. Blue line are the active cases, green line are the recoveries. And the virus does what the virus does. Here's China. This is their experience. Remember, they're already opening back up. They're the second largest economy in the world. And we built models around this. This yellow line, now this is for all the engineers and statisticians in the group. We built this line specifically for you because what it actually does is it takes the modeling of this and it shows the correlation of the modeling that we have to what's actually going on. So this is the China chart. This is South Korea. You can take a look at that. It follows it well. And then you take a look at Germany, right? And there's the model there. And interestingly enough, it's Germany, it's Spain, it's Iran, it's Italy. All the other countries look like that. But then this goes back to our original research. When you look at the United States, our chart looks like this. Now, if the whole rest of the world that around between day 116 and day 20, you notice those days are in the lower part of the thing. This follows a very predictable pattern. The whole rest of the world is in a different spot than we are. Our chart should look like this at day 116, but instead it looks like this. So we had to ask ourselves this big question. Are the citizens of the United States so genetically different than the rest of the world that we're having a different set of circumstances, or is there something wrong with the data? Remember I said you can't believe everything you see on the news. So we dug into the data and we found out that there's 8 states that are not delivering recovery information to the CDC. They're not tracking recoveries. So, of course, you're going to have numbers that are 30, 40% off when you've got 36% of the nation's population not reporting. 30% of the confirmed cases are not being reported. So now you have to think about how decision makers make policy around incomplete information when you have states not reporting data. This goes back to that big question. What about a second wave? Well, quite frankly, we're not even through the first wave first. This thing moves around the nation. It started in New York and it's moving westward. It moves around the globe at different speeds. So are there going to be fits and starts with, do we open too soon? Do we open too late? What are we going to do? Governors have got to make decisions based on data that they have. Are there going to be missteps and mistakes? Yes. No one's ever been here before. But the important thing is we now know enough about the virus that we can change how we look at it. This is the important thing to remember. The virus did not stop the economy. The virus did not stop the economy. The government stopped the economy to combat the virus. That's an important distinction. Therefore, policy is what took place here. And it's going to be policy that opens the economy back up at varying levels and what we're trying to do. And how governments are going to respond to the elongated first wave or the second wave, that's what's going to be important. We're going to go from this moment where initially, to prevent overrunning the hospitals, we needed to protect everyone from everyone, which is what we did. It's very important. But now we're going to move to this environment where we're protecting those at risk from anyone. We're going to change how we deal with this. You see, like I said, we know a lot more now. We know that those at risk are those over 70. It's pretty simple. Now, in the new data that you see coming out, most of the people getting the new cases and the new peaks you see in these states are younger people that are out doing things, and they're getting mild cases and they're getting over. But those who are over 70, look, if you are at risk, stay home. Stay safe. If you love someone who is at risk, protect them. That is what you need to do. We don't have a vaccination. We don't have a therapeutic. We're probably, months or maybe even a year away. But the rest of the world is going to continue to move on. We pretty much have to. But now we know more than we knew 90 days ago. So let's talk about recognizing that policy is going to change how we do this. Let's see what's going to happen with the economy. This is important. You see, we're going to have two bad quarters. First quarter is going to be bad. Second quarter is going to be bad. Very true. We know that. We know that. That's when we had the lockdown, of course. First quarter's bad, second quarter's bad, but China is already coming back online. The second largest economy in the world is already coming back online. There'll be fits and starts, but they're coming on. And on top of this, it's tons of U.S. stimulus. As a matter of fact, there's this tug of war between the virus and the stimulus. And guess what? We've got more stimulus than we've got virus. That's an important thing to know. More stimulus than we do virus. See, this is something that you're probably not going to see anybody else tell you about. But if you calculate the math around how, if we said, we stopped the economy 48 days. That's what we did. We stopped everything for 48 days. And we didn't even stop it completely, right? We just slowed it down and said some things you could do and some things you couldn't. But let's just assume they completely stopped everything. It would have been 48 days. It would have been 48 days. But what we've done is we've already approved 80 days worth of stimulus. 80 days worth of stimulus. So we now have a circumstance where we have more stimulus than we do virus. And that's what's already approved. And Laila and Rick were talking about more stuff is coming. So we've been able to add more stimulus into the economy than the virus took out. And long term, as we look through this and look into the rest of this year and look into next year, we're going to find that traction take off. And it's going to be strong for the recovery. So we can be positive about that. And that's important. The other thing about this year and the markets and how we're investing is this year is forced adaptation of e-commerce. That's really important. Forced adaptation of e-commerce. Look, if you were not shopping online before this hit, you certainly are now. Now we talk about policy matters. Laila talked about it. Rick talked about it. What else is going to go on, right? Because the rest of the year, it's all about the coronavirus, and then it's all about the election. So policy matters. So we have to have a plan. Well, we've got a plan red and a plan blue. We don't really know at this moment who's going to win. So for the portfolios, we have to be prepared in either case. But most importantly, when policy is unclear, let's focus on the thing that is no matter what. Let's focus on policy no matter what. You see, I believe in consumers. You don't go into the store and say, I'm going to shop from the red aisle today, or I'm going to shop only in the blue aisle today. You don't. What you do is you go to the store and you buy what you need. You buy what you need, regardless of whether it's red aisle or blue aisle. And so that's what human beings do. I believe in consumers. So what we're going to do is make sure that the investment portfolios match what human beings are doing. You see, the big thing, the big principle that we always have is that human behavior drives consumption. Nobody makes a penny until someone decides to buy. Nobody makes a penny until someone decides to buy. That way, if we can get into the decision-making process of the American consumer, understand what they say and how they do it and what they do, then we can be predictive about what they're going to buy and the companies they're going to buy it from. And when we do that, we can own those companies, because those companies tend to be at a choke point. They tend to have excess pricing power that tends to give them excess earnings over time. You see, human demand hasn't changed that much. We still consume about 2,000 calories a day, and we've been doing that for a very long period of time. You've seen me talk about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs many, many times. Human beings, 6,000 years of human history kind of tell us you're going to do physiological needs and safety and security, then love and belonging, self-esteem, self-act. This is how your brain is hardwired. Actually, it's kind of funny. Remember when the lockdown began, or remember those very difficult moments early on and everybody ran to the store, right? So here's the deal. When you're under stress, when you're fearful, you naturally move to the lower levels of that Maslow pyramid, right? You move down, you focus on that safety and security and the physiological needs when you're under external stress. And that's why you saw everybody run out and confess, you did it too, 75 rolls of toilet paper. Everybody went and bought 75 rolls of toilet paper in response to a virus that has no gastroenterological effects. Yet, that's what people did. We're human beings. We react that way. External stresses cause changes in behavior. You see, in the last 20 years, we've had 3 once-in-a-lifetime events. Major catastrophic events that changed behavior. You had 9/11, and that caused us to rethink our physical security. You changed how you got on airplanes. You changed how you thought about crowds. You changed how you thought about going to stadiums and all of those things. You remember that? It was a little scary. And then you had the housing crisis and the banking crisis. And that changed how we thought about financial security. That was difficult. It changed how we thought about debt and all of those things. And now, COVID. Well, this causes us to think about our health security. It's going to change how we behave, how businesses conduct themselves. This is a big moment. So as we move forward after 2021, we're going to see what we call the flight to flyover country. We're going to see what we call the flight to flyover country. And that means that companies are going to recognize, we've learned one big thing. You can work from anywhere. I mean, we've done it. Well, look at us. We're doing this today. You can sit in your home and come to this event. People can work in a distributed fashion, right? Companies have learned that, and they're going to learn from that about how they do their business. You're going to see a company in San Francisco is going to be more than happy for the key employees to move to Kansas City. Why? Because they can pay them $25,000 a year less. The employee will live in a much nicer house, have a much higher standard of living. The employee's happier. They're still doing their work. And the company in San Francisco has lowered their labor costs significantly. You're going to begin to see this transformation. You see, we saw this already coming. In the middle part of the decade, you saw this movement from the countryside into the cities. This urbanization was going on. But now the trends already move the other way as technology allows us to transform how we do things and move out, right, into the countryside. Well, COVID is now accelerating that moment. And we're going to see that. So our investment thesis moving forward for the rest of the decade is going to begin to look at things that talk about that big migration. You see, what we like are companies that enable this distributed workspace and distributed work life, allowing to transform people into working and living remotely. And then companies that increase their margin by allowing workers to move and do things in less expensive regions. And so we're going to like the 5Gs and the clouds and robotics and AI and e-commerce, all of those things. And companies that take advantage of these moments are going to be some technology companies, service companies, and manufacturing. They're going to increase their margins. So those are companies that you're going to see come into the portfolios throughout the rest of the decade. Those are the big knowable themes and the trends we're going to have to deal with. So my summary is, for 2020, we're really going to look through this volatility, consolidation, the opportunities that presents. It's going to be that great big argument between stimulus versus virus, but the markets and the virus are going to learn to coexist. The markets and the virus are going to learn to coexist. Here's something that's really important for you to realize. It is the human nature. It is the human condition that there's always this tug of war, okay, between fear and aspiration. There's this tug of war between fear and aspiration. And over time, aspiration always wins. If it didn't, we would still be living in caves and we would still be part of the food chain. But it's the human nature that aspiration always overcomes fear. And we move through this and we adapt and we overcome to the challenges that are there in the environment and everything else. So feel confident about how we're moving through these things through 2020. In 2021, it's going to be election dependent. It's going to be those things around the challenges of policy. So rather than worry about that at this moment, we're just going to focus on people. What do people do regardless? And that's how the portfolios will be managed until policy becomes clear, and then we'll adjust. And 2020 and beyond, it's really going to be all about the migration from the coast into the countryside, the flight to the flyover country, if you will. That's going to be important. And that big trend is going to affect our economy in the future. So it's a stock picker's market. We're going to pick individual companies, big noble themes, identify the choke points, target best of class. We're going to take capital gains because to make profits, you got to take profits. And quite frankly, I love profits more than I hate taxes. And it's very important to do that. And then we're going to be probably more domestic than foreign because we don't know exactly how the coronavirus is going to work its way around the rest of the world and the timing of that and variable speed. So let's focus on the things we know the best. And those are the things we're doing right here at home. So we have to be prepared. We have to be opportunistic. And we have to go to work and do our job every day because you might be hunkered down in your house. And quite frankly, there's many of you that to be safe, that's what you need to do. And we need you to stay safe. We'll engage on the markets. You stay safe, we'll engage on the markets. Because while you might be hunkered down in your house, but your portfolios aren't, we've got this. We're here to help you because it's our why. Our job is to really clearly focus on providing you with greater comfort regarding your income and confidence regarding your wealth. I want to thank you for the time you spent with us today. I want to remind you that next year we're going to have another client luncheon, and you'll actually probably not get the rubber chicken, but you'll have either real chicken or salmon or something. Laila picks the menu. But the important thing to look at is that we're going to have it again on May the 1st. Now, Laila, come join me. We appreciate, thank you.
I want to give him certainly a round of applause. There's no audience here, but I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all for listening to us today.